Hello, and welcome to China Daily's Big Talk. I'm Mike Peters, and we're very privileged today to have with us former U.S. President Jimmy Carter. Thank you for taking the time with us, sir.
It's good to be with you and the people of China.
Thank you. I don't have to tell you, you're one of the founding fathers of U.S.-China diplomatic ties, and you're here for the 40th anniversary of the ping-pong diplomacy.
Yes.
Can you, having been connected to this country for more than 30 years in this way, give us kind of a snapshot of the way you see relations now?
Well, first of all, I think the people of America and also of China realize that this is one of the most important bilateral developments and agreements and friendships in the world. We are responsible in many ways for what goes on in the Western Pacific and also throughout the world as far as the United Nations relationships are concerned. Economic development, progress made in the poorest countries on earth, like in Africa. So in every way that China and the United States can work together, it's best for all people on earth. So what began in 1978 with the announcement of diplomatic relations between the United States and China was a very important step for America and also for China, and I think for the rest of the world.
The United States has recently announced a new strategic focus on the Asia-Pacific region, and some commentators have looked at that as kind of a counterbalance to the rising influence of China. Do you think that's a fair assessment?
No, I don't think so. The United States has been involved in this region of the world ever since I was born. In fact, when I was a little child, I had an uncle who was in the Navy, and the U.S. Navy was all over this part of the world, including in Hong Kong and in Shanghai and in Qingdao, as well as in the Philippines and in Japan. So the United States has long had an interest in this part of the world. And of course, we've been involved in terrible conflicts involving Japan, involving Korea, involving Vietnam as well. But I think the coming of U.S. diplomatic relations, when I made this decision in 1978, along with Deng Xiaoping, was a turning point in this part of the world. I think it's shown that the United States and China, with their own individual and different cultures and political systems, can indeed be have a common commitment to peace and to progress and stability in this part of the world. So economically, politically, diplomatically, and militarily, stability is very important. And of course, the United States and China have a lot more in common than might be indicated on occasion. I would say particularly in election years in the United States, with some of the statements of candidates who are running for re-election. So I don't see any danger at all to the overall accommodation and friendship and cooperation and partnership between the U.S. and China.
Since you bring up election year politics, we know that there are some people in China, some people in Congress,
yes,
who would like to punish China in some way for the currency.
I know.
And you've said this week that you don't see Congress likely taking that kind of action.
They won't.
Is that because there is still a long-standing bipartisan consensus on U.S.-China relations and moving them forward?
I think the more rational people in the U.S. Congress, and certainly in the White House, understand that this slight difference of opinion between the value of the Chinese currency is relatively insignificant. As a matter of fact, I've observed this very closely myself. 5 years ago, every RMB in China was worth, it took 8 of them to equal $1. Now it just takes 6 of them to equal $1. That's a 22% change in the value of the Chinese currency just in the last 5 years, in the same direction that the United States wants to see happen. So change is taking place, not because of comments from Washington, but because the Chinese leaders in politics and economics agree that this is best for what's good for China. And the decision about the U.S. currency should be made in Washington, and the decisions about the RMB, the yuan, should be made in Beijing. So comments back and forth are relatively insignificant. But this bill that was passed in the U.S. Senate will not pass in the U.S. House of Representatives, and if it does, then President Obama will veto it, so it's not a threat.
Okay. Another issue between the two countries, and it's been an issue long before your administration recognized the People's Republic of China,
Yes.
is arms sales to Taiwan.
Yes.
Having watched the relationship develop over 30 years with that in the background, how do you see that playing out over time?
Well, over time, it will play out the way it has been recently, where the United States makes some decisions concerning arms sales. I might say they deviate from what my promise was to Deng Xiaoping in 1979. But the Chinese complain about the weaponry sold to Taiwan. But still, as you know, just in the last week, there have been high-level talks between Defense Department officials in the United States and the military leaders of China. So both governments recognize that this is a matter of some difference, but in balance, it's relatively insignificant compared to the overall commitment to understanding and further progress as partners.
Okay. The Carter Center
Yes.
has an ongoing rapport with China.
Yes.
And since 1997, I think, you've been involved in witnessing elections in villages all over the country,
Yes.
Affecting the daily lives of millions of people. What kind of changes have you seen in that time?
Well, the Carter Center programs in China really began in the early 80s when we helped to develop a factory to produce prostheses, artificial arms and legs, that the Chinese didn't have then. And later we helped train about 900 educators in China so that the teachers throughout the country could be trained on how to give instructions to little children who were deaf and blind. Since then, of course, as you say, the government of China decided that there should be democratic elections in the little villages, and they asked us to monitor this progress. And we've done that now for 15 years. And it's been a very gratifying experience for me and my wife and for the people at the Carter Center, because we've been able to go to the very exciting observations of these elections throughout the nation of China. And now more than 900 million Chinese people have been involved in the little village elections in more than 650,000 villages. And it's a very clear demonstration that the Chinese government is willing to see some changes in the system that prevailed before we normalized diplomatic relations, before the reform and opening up process began. And of course, we just came from Hong Kong, and there are changes now being made in the selection of leaders in Hong Kong. As you know, in 2017, 2020, there'll be direct elections for the officials and the government of Hong Kong. So that's a slow process. The decisions have been made entirely by the National People's Congress, the leaders of China, and the Carter Center cooperates when we are asked to do so in a very friendly way. But it's been a very gratifying experience for us.
So when you're out in the field seeing these things happen, does it ever remind you of the days when a certain peanut farmer from Georgia decided to enter politics?
Well, it does, of course. I was in the U.S. Navy for many years, and I was 38 years old before I became involved in politics. And I was still a peanut farmer then. As a matter of fact, I'm still growing peanuts right now on our farm. But yes, I've come a long way in my experience. But I would say the earliest awareness that I ever had of a foreign country was when I was a little child on the farm and I knew about China. And I became very deeply interested in China.
What did you know about China?
Well, my uncle was in the Navy here, and he would send me souvenirs from the seaports where his ship visited, from Hong Kong and from Shanghai and from Qingdao, for instance. And I still have a little ship model of what we call a Chinese junk that my uncle sent me from Shanghai. I was only 7 years old when I received it. I still have it. It's still in my bedroom in my boyhood home near Plains, and all the visitors who come there can see this little ship model that I received from China when I was 7 years old. And then later, when I was in the submarine force in 1949, I came here as a young naval officer to visit the same seaports, and I was intrigued with the people of China then, and as soon as I had a chance as president of course, I began the process of normalizing diplomatic relations. So it's been a long process in my life involving China and my love for the Chinese people.
That kind of people-to-people connection started happening for you very early.
It did, and one of the first things I saw internationally was in 1971 when the U.S. ping pong team, who was in Japan, was invited over here by Premier Zhou Enlai and was honored in the Great Hall of China, and we just commemorated the 40th anniversary of that. And some of those same ping pong players took part in matches back and forth across the table, and of course Vice President Xi Jinping and I were there, and we watched them together.
Did you get to play with him?
No, we didn't play together, but we signed a big ping pong racket, you know, the bat. And so it was a nice and very exciting prospect. And we also saw the present world champion players, who were young men, play each other between China and the United States. A very historic moment. But it was that breakthrough just with ping pong players, that is, people to people, that really were more important than the decisions of the political leaders. And I think that is a stability that's going to prevail in the future. No matter what the political leaders might have as arguments, the people will still prevail. And we now have 165,000 Chinese students in American universities and about 13,000 American students in Chinese universities. And in the future, they will be the leaders of our two countries, and they'll be also knowing more about each other.
Sure.
And the reasons for harmony and cooperation and mutual respect, because we'll always have differences. You know, in our cultural approach, in our political background, in our ancient history, we'll be different in many ways, but still the ties that bind us together are much more important than any differences that might arise.
Have you had a chance while you've been here to see the things that have been going on with President Obama's 100,000 strong initiative, where he's hoping to change that balance of the number of Chinese students going to America versus the number of Americans coming here?
Yes, as a matter of fact, I was at the United States Embassy this morning, and I made a television program to be used to promote the 100,000 strong commitment. And that is to have at least 100,000 U.S. students in here, in China, in your universities, within the next 4 years. So that's a very important thing to match what the Chinese have done in sending so many Chinese students to the American universities. Every year, by the way, I teach a large number of Chinese students at Emory University in Atlanta.
Is that right?
Yes. I've been a professor there now for 30 years. And China is the #1 nation in the world to send their students to America to be educated. I'm very proud of that.
What do you think surprises Chinese students the most about America when they get there?
Well, I think what surprised them 30 years ago was how far advanced American society was with the number of automobiles and airplanes and so forth. But now, many Americans are surprised when they come here to see how rapid the advances have been with your high-speed trains, which we don't have, and with your enormous growth in economic progress in technology and in prosperity. So I think that the surprises now are becoming much less important or significant than they were 30 years ago, because our countries are becoming more and more alike in the advantages that we have in a modern, rapidly changing technological world.
Great. If I have time, can I ask you a couple of quick questions about Africa?
It'll be fine.
I know that Africa is a particular interest of yours,
Yes.
and you said sometime within the last year that you were very excited about the imminent eradication of the guinea worm plague, which the Carter Center has gotten great credit for dealing with almost single-handedly.
Yes.
Why was that such a hard problem to solve?
Well, guinea worm is a terrible disease. In fact, it's an ancient disease mentioned in the Bible. It was called the fiery serpent. And you know the symbol for doctors, which is a staff with those are guinea worms wrapped around the staff.
Wow, I did not know.
And so it's a very ancient disease, and we found it in 26,500 villages in 20 different nations, in the most isolated villages that had no source of clean water, and that's what causes the disease. And we found 3.5 million cases of guinea worm, and we've now reduced that to less than 900, which is 99.9-something% reduction. And the only place we have any significant number of guinea worm cases left in the world now is in South Sudan, where the long-time conflict between North and South Sudan has prevented our being successful, but we're making very rapid progress. And it'll soon be a disease eradicated from the face of the earth. Never again will we see guinea worm afflicting people in the world.
That's wonderful. You are well aware that China is providing more foreign aid for Africa as well quite recently. And I wondered if you've had interaction with Chinese relief agencies, especially in places like Sudan, since you're one of the few Americans that...
Well, that's one of the reasons I came to China on this trip, was because of China's interest in working with the Carter Center in some of the benevolent programs in Africa, for instance, involving health care. Okay. So we'll be looking forward to that in the future as a rapidly increasing commitment of both China and the Carter Center. I met, for instance, earlier this week with the former Minister of Commerce who was in charge of that program in Africa, and he outlined to us, in a very surprising way, the multiple beneficent programs that China has in Africa to improve their health care, involving malaria and many other diseases. So this is a surprise to me. And I think it's one thing that the rest of the world doesn't acknowledge or know about, is how extensive China's programs are in helping improve the quality of lives of people in China and people in Africa and in other very poor countries. So we'll both publicize what China is already doing and work side by side with China in cooperation between the Carter Center and the government of China. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, sir.
It's been a pleasure.
And for me.
Yeah,